Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awakening people. Today's guest, I believe, is going to be number 385. And if this is new to you, go to batgap.com, and if you want to see more, go to batgap.com and look under the past interviews menu, and you'll find all the previous ones archived in various ways. This show is made possible by the support of appreciative listeners and viewers, so if you appreciate it and feel like supporting it, there's a donate button on every page of the site. My guest today is Mari Perron. Mari, I'm just going to read her bio here and then perhaps stop reading it and speak extemporaneously, but Mari tells us she's delighted that A Course of Love has granted her a voice in the new dialogue that has opened about who we are as human and divine beings. She feels that the wisdom of the heart, a major focus of A Course of Love, has at times been missing from the conversation, and loves being able to speak for both the heart and the human. A question asked within A Course of Love is this: doesn't it make sense that the only error possible is that of not being who you are? Mari is called the first first receiver of this course that has been given as an extension of what was begun in A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles was recorded by Helen Schucman in the late 60s and early 70s. Helen was called a scribe of the words of Jesus, which since that time have gone out to millions of people all over the world. A Course in Miracles was stated to be a course in thought reversal and mind training. Within A Course of Love, which Mari received between 1998 and 2001, Jesus calls Mari its first receiver and says that each person who lets it enter their heart is a receiver as well. Its stated purpose is a return to a true identity prior to the time of learning, and it calls for learning to end. Mari feels that in a world that has told us that everything we need to know can be known with our minds and or learned from teachers, experts, and gurus, we've often felt discouraged from listening to our hearts or trusting our inner knowing. A Course of Love offers a new way of knowing and invites us to enter dialogue and become creators of the new. Mari lives in St. Paul, Minnesota, where she is a writer and contemplative as well as an engaged mother and grandmother. So welcome, Mari.
Thank you so much for having me, Rick.
Yeah, I'm glad to meet you, and it's been nice getting to know you over the past week, listening to your recordings and reading your books. And
getting my phone calls about, am I doing this right?
Yeah, right. Working out some technical snafus.
Yeah.
So what we just revealed in my reading that little thing is that, you kind of channeled this book from Jesus. And I know that you yourself said that when you first were exposed to A Course in Miracles, you were a little skeptical as to whether it was really from Jesus, or, I don't know what you might have thought it might have been, but, that's a little bit of a tall order, perhaps. And so, let's help out those who might also be skeptical and give a little explanation as to how you let's say this: how did you become convinced that A Course in Miracles was really from Jesus, and what would you say to those who might be skeptical that either that book or yours are really from Jesus?
Really good question. I think what convinced me when I was reading A Course in Miracles was a feeling of being known. I was absolutely astounded that what I was reading explained absolutely in the thinking that's insane was my thinking, so it's talking about how you torture yourself with these thoughts, and how insane that is. But it was like he just knew me, and I thought that had to be a divine knowing for someone to talk to people all over the world and have them feel the same way, to have them feel that known. And there was also something about the words themselves, like I felt it much more with my own course, that entering. But there was like a rhythm, and I just fell into that. I never studied A Course in Miracles. I never joined a group. I think the only associated book I read was Marianne Williamson's book. because I just read it over and over, because it was like when I was reading it, I just felt like I was with Jesus. It was incredible. So that's how I felt I knew. I think people will feel that or they won't, you know.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a few short, simple questions that might be the kind of questions a child would ask, okay?
Okay.
So first of all, who's Jesus?
Well, I was raised a Catholic, and I was born in 1955. So when I was young, all the moms were stay-at-home moms, and people only had one car. And it was like the only time we really went in the car to go anywhere was to church, almost. So every week we'd go to church, and in those early days it was still Latin, and it was mysterious, and I felt like that mystery was something that moved into me, intrigued me. I mean, it was like so from my very early age, I liked going to church, and then I went to Catholic school where they told me, Jesus was my brother and my friend, and I began to talk to Jesus and just always feel that I had someone accompanying me who cared about me and loved me. And so I think part of the way I see Jesus is based on that, and other people will see it differently. But it's, the idea of Jesus as God's Son who incarnated and lived here as a man. And I think that symbology is very true to what's going on now, that we are being called now to realize that we have that God spark in us and to live that way. And so to have one example life that said, I am both man and God, that feels very important to me.
Okay. Second childlike question.
Okay.
Where does Jesus live?
Well, where do, any of our deceased loved ones go, and you feel that presence sometimes of a grandmother or, somebody who, especially those who have just recently died, like I know after my dad died, I kept hearing this song, this Beatles song in my head, and I don't know if I can remember it now.
Give me a hint and I'll know it.
If there's anything that you want, if there's anything that you need,
from me
just
to
call
you.
on me.
From me to you.
From me to you. And it was like in my head until suddenly, and it's just like you're wanting it to go away and you're not even listening to it. And then all of a sudden I said, oh my God, that's got to be my dad, because that's just, he wouldn't be the singing Beatles to me, but that would be his message to me. But I mean, I've had so many experiences of feeling connected and talked to people who've, been connected with people who have passed on. And so I do believe that there's a field of consciousness, and it's not a blob field, there are individual consciousness even within the wholeness of consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's where Jesus, the man, abides. There's another part of Jesus that in my course is called Christ consciousness. And so.
Yeah. Okay. Third question, a little bit less childlike, is so you're kind of implying that there's a realm where Jesus resides, and presumably other beings reside there also. And we're told when we were kids, well, Jesus lives in heaven, and so on. So maybe we could call that realm heaven, and that Jesus isn't just sort of hanging out and playing a harp. He's actively engaged in the concerns of humanity through people like you and many, many others who, who invoke him in one way or another or connect with him in one way or another. Would you agree with what I just said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Now, totally unchildlike question. NASA tells us that there are probably around 20 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy, and now over 2 trillion galaxies in the known universe. So if you do the math, that's a lot of places where life potentially exists. Do you feel that Jesus is sort of has a local jurisdiction, that he's assigned to this planet and takes care of it, or do you feel that he's kind of some kind of universal spirit that is engaged in the welfare of uncountable trillions and quadrillions of planets.
Well, I believe that the idea of Jesus being the Son of God is, that he's the same as God. And God, I see God as the creator of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I, don't have any problem with anybody else's way of seeing, but that's my way of seeing it. So yes, I would certainly see that the whole universe is part of this loving act of a loving creator.
Okay. And that Jesus, the being, the entity, the emissary of God, is actually overseeing and interceding in some way with beings throughout the whole universe? Is that what you're saying? I know this is kind of speculative, but
yeah.
But I'm not sort of giving you a hard time here. It's just that I find that astronomy is one of the greatest defenses against religious fundamentalists, and I know you're not one of them. You're not a fundamentalist, but when they start telling me that Jesus is the only way, and that kind of thing,
yeah.
I start kind of giving them a hint as how big the universe might actually be. And if we start getting into the world at 6,000 years old, I start talking about the speed of light and how the Andromeda galaxy is 2 million years away and things like 2 million light years away.
Right.
So I don't know, just to put this in a kind of a cosmic context, of what we're actually talking about here.
I believe most spiritual beings, people who are spiritual, call themselves spiritual or religious, but particularly spiritual, really feel that there is that God spark in them,
Mm-hmm.
that they are of the divine and they have a divine self as well as a human self.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does that go with your question? I just don't see any problem with attaching that godliness that created the universe to, people attach that to different things as they're growing up, as they're raised, as they are thoughtful, and as they explore other things. And I have no problem with that. It's just, for me, that is, I believe in Jesus as that one, as far as I know, and I'm not a scholar at all, but as far as I know, no other spiritual person was called the Son of God. I think there's kind of that, and like I say, even if you don't believe it, that symbology that we can be of God here in form, I feel is really important.
Yeah.
Especially right now.
Sure. But I don't know, does it say in the Bible, and if not the Bible, does it say in the Gnostic Gospels or something that we're all sons and daughters of God?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not a kind of an exclusive title. It's something that could be said of anyone, yes?
Yes, but until that time, I don't think we understood that. And then, a lot of people still don't understand that, but I think he was the example of that.
Yeah.
In history.
Right.
So that's all I'm saying.
No, that's good. And how about, I don't know to what, I think initially you hadn't, but now you've studied other traditions and so on around the world. And, there are many beautiful examples of people who were God-conscious saints, and God realized and one with God and spoke very beautifully and wrote beautiful poetry and scriptures and all that stuff. So, it seems like we all have the potential to be that. And, we all are that, essentially, and have the potential to realize that consciously, and that there's nothing exclusive about Jesus. He was just a profound example of what's possible. Do you agree? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's if I didn't make it sound that way, yes, it's like, I think that's the thing about Jesus that's so universal, is that we are all that.
Yeah. And I think he said, all these great things that I do, you'll do even greater things,
Yes.
And so he wasn't setting himself up as sort of the one guy that had access to this sort of realization. He was, as I understand it, trying to convey that everyone has that potential.
And still is,
And still is, yeah.
Yeah, instead of seeing ourselves as limited to who we are in our human form, to see our humanity and our godliness, our divinity combined.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I don't mean to give you a grilling here. I just want to kind of lay that foundation of, because a lot of people sort of have and a lot of spiritual people who are into Eastern spirituality now sort of have a bad taste in their mouth from their religious upbringing, where they were kind of harangued about, this is the only way, and there have been so many wars and carnage and behind that idea that just kind of establishing the broad-mindedness of this conversation here.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one right way has wreaked a lot of havoc.
It has, yeah. Good. So as I gather, A Course of Love, I think this is a real beautiful thing that you lay out, that I didn't know, in a sense I'm not a very good person to be interviewing you about this or A Course in people in A Course in Miracles, because I haven't really studied either. But you laid out something really interesting about A Course in Miracles that I didn't know, which is that it seems to be largely about the mind, and tends to dismiss the world as illusion. And whereas A Course of Love is heart-oriented and doesn't emphasize that the world is merely an illusion, wouldn't just sort of brush it off so glibly,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, want to elaborate a bit on that?
Yes. It feels so important. Because I really believe that what is happening now, we're in a new time, and it's astrology is telling us that, and all kinds of people are telling us that we're in this time, and I believe it is a time of embodying. It's a time of embodying this, and that is what's going to create a new world. And that's so to imagine that the world is anything but holy and anything but real is something that I hope people begin to, a pattern of thought that maybe people will begin to shake a little bit as we embrace and embody our divinity here on earth. And I have met so many people, almost all of A Course of Love's readers come to it from A Course in Miracles. And I've had people tell me stories that are, of just shutting down because of that idea of the illusion. A woman told me she hadn't cried over a sunset in years because she believed now that was an illusion.
Yeah.
And one man even told me he didn't name his child because the child in form was just an illusion. I don't know if that's true, but he told me that. And, so...
should just name them illusion.
Yeah, maybe. So there were certain extremes that idea had people going to, and what Course of Love does, which I think is particularly important for those from A Course in Miracles, is bring that back. But actually, Course in Miracles, in my readings of it, and like I say, I'm no scholar, I just read it, I didn't study it, but I read it many times, and I never got that. I never got that sense. And I think a lot of interpretations and popularizations have done that more so than the actual book. And if I had a good memory, I could tell you many passages, but I don't. But there are many passages in A Course in Miracles where creation is spoken of, this world is spoken of as beautiful.
Yeah.
And so...
The way I have come to terms with that whole world is illusion point is that it's illusion in the sense that we're not seeing it aright. We're not seeing it as it really, in its full glory. Even science will tell you, you look at anything and, what you're not really seeing what's actually there, and science has given us tools to see more deeply into what we're actually looking at. And, it's a whole other world that we're not aware of, just sort of glancing superficially. So by the same token, there's so much more to be appreciated of the world that is all around us. And if we're just sort of perceiving it superficially, like through a glass darkly, as the Bible says, then we're, you know, in a sense that's illusion, because we're not really seeing the full reality of it.
Yes. And this isn't exactly said in this language anywhere, but what I take from A Course of Love and the way it talks about A Course in Miracles in A Course of Love is that the ego's world was the illusion.
The ego.
So it's exactly what you're saying, you know, the perception that we had of the world and ourselves, that we perceived ourselves as separate from everyone else, as alone, as having all these reasons to be fearful, that created our perception of a fearful, scary world.
Yeah.
So when you see the world with love, and you see yourself with love, that's a really huge part, everything changes. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, there's that saying, life sucks, then you die. You know, and that's, you know, there are other perspectives that are a lot more encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. I have the sense of this being, I mean, I think humanity is, in a certain sense, like the last frontier, you know, that we are a consciousness that grew out of creation, and we can have such joy, and we are creators ourselves. And as we begin to really experience the fullness of who we are, what A Course of Love says is we can create the new. And I am very much looking forward to being part of creating the new.
Yeah, well, you don't have to look forward to it because you're already doing it.
Thank you.
The other thought that occurred to me a minute ago when we were talking about illusion is that, you know, if God is really omnipresent, as we're told, and as there's evidence for, if you actually look closely at the marvelous intelligence in every little iota of creation, then, you know, the world is divine because it's God. You know, we're looking at it. God is hiding in plain sight, so to speak.
Exactly. And how can God be in the smallest flea and not in human beings?
Yeah, and he is in the smallest flea. Look at a flea under a microscope and look what a miracle of creative intelligence that is.
You know, I'm learning all this science by National Geographic for Children and Ranger Rick. But it's like, it's great because it's not so complicated that I can't understand it, you know, and I just love it. I love reading those things. Yeah. With grandchildren.
Irene just made a noise because we're dealing with flea problems on our dogs right now, and maybe she's questioning that. I think it was Woody Allen that said that God is omnipresent except for certain parts of New Jersey.
I love that.
One thing I found really cool about your whole thing is, and you may not know this, but there are a number of spiritual teachers and traditions that actually delineate a progression from head to heart to gut in terms of awakening. Adyashanti uses those three terms. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi talked that way. He talked about a sort of a realization of the self on the level of the mind, where, you know, you realize the true nature of the self, but the world is regarded as illusion. And then the heart doesn't like that, because the heart doesn't like separation, and so the heart begins to bridge the gulf and eventually creates a sort of unification between self and world, and which one appreciates the sort of divine or celestial quality of the world. And then he said that there's another stage which might correspond to Adyashanti's gut stage, where true union takes place. And so if Course in Miracles is mind and Course of Love is heart, maybe you're actually tracking that same progression that these other teachers and traditions have discussed.
It's certainly possible, yeah. One of the main themes of A Course of Love is, it starts with, you know, really changing the focus from head to heart, because it basically said the ego made off with everything you learned, you know, and so we come to the heart so that that doesn't happen. But then, as we go on, it talks about wholeheartedness. It's one of the main themes, so that we unify ourselves from within first. We unify mind and heart. So it's not heart, it's not a separation. Right. And so we become in union within, and that's like the key that gets us to being able to be more and more in union outside of ourselves, with in relationship with nature, with our fellow human beings, with God. Yeah.
In your own experience, in your own life, did you see this kind of progression? Like when you were studying A Course in Love, A Course in Miracles, I mean, did you sort of realize its potential to a significant degree experientially, and perhaps even, you know, walk around regarding the world as illusion and all, and then have a kind of a dissatisfaction, like there must be more? Or?
No. I just loved it. I just fell into it and I loved it. And this happened to me with A Course in Miracles and A Course of Love, which has made it hard for me sometimes to talk about, or I think it's going to be hard to talk about, and I usually seem to do okay, but I could never really remember it. And I have heard this now from many people about A Course of Love. I don't know so much about A Course in Miracles, but that it comes into you and you have this sense of, you know it, you got it, and then it's gone, you know? So, but no, I didn't feel, now I forgot your question, but I don't think I felt the way you're talking about.
Okay. Well, on this you got it, it's gone point.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're studying A Course in Miracles, you're reading a book, right? Or maybe you're in a study group with other people and you're discussing it. And that's kind of somewhat on the level of intellect, it would seem to me. You're taking in concepts and you're pondering them and so on. And, you know, spiritual realization is usually regarded as being something more visceral, more fundamental, more experiential. Like if you bite into an apple, you're not conceptualizing the experience of the taste. You don't even have to know it's an apple. You could give it to somebody in Africa that's never seen an apple, and they'd have that experience of the taste. So, you know, there are scriptures and books and all kinds of things which offer us things in concepts and words, and then there's the experience that those things are pointing to. Like Zen says, don't mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon. It's just a pointer. So how does A Course in Miracles or A Course of Love enable one to move from taking in words and concepts to actually having a living experience that you're going to be having whether or not you're entertaining those concepts?
Well, you know, I think I didn't feel that way with A Course in Miracles because I didn't study it per se. I just kept reading it, cover to cover.
Seven times.
7 times. And I didn't go to groups and I didn't read the other teachers. So it was an experience for me. I don't know how you feel about reading, but for me, reading is an experience. I mean, I am in love. You know, I fall in love, like with Thomas Merton or, you know, Rollo May, or, you know, I fall in love with these people who I read, and the books are like my best friends, and so they're working in me. That's the way I see it. They're working in me, and I reread books that I really like because of that. I'll go over them again, and there's something that but I don't necessarily, you know, I don't study it. I don't stop to figure it out. It's just, I know it's speaking to me. And then maybe at some point it informs an insight that I have or a growth within me, but it's not necessarily linked, which I think is one of the things. My favorite thing about A Course of Love is that it's talking about the end of learning. So it's like what I have found is that anything that you are trying to learn keeps you from this absolute engagement that it is when you are in an inner place, when you are accepting these things into an inner place. That's an experience. And so how do you share, you know, without the teaching and learning model? And what Jesus says at the end of A Course of Love is you share through dialogue, you share through being who we are. And I always think of do you remember the book Aquarian Conspiracy?
Yeah, I remember. I don't know if I ever read it.
Just vaguely. Well, I had it for years too and didn't read it. And then when I read it, I was like, it made me, it was that time, I believe of maybe 60s, when people here were really finding, you know, spirituality for the first time, and they were, what was being done was they were sort of collecting these, and everybody was just like agog and excited about what was happening. And that excitement was so wonderful to me. And I believe that's what happens. It's like you get something that calls you to your spiritual path. Something happens inside of you. Well, that's you're being touched by, not intellectually. It's like your heart feeling a calling to a particular thing. And then if you then go and try to study the way, I think a lot of people get trapped in that. They've got an arrow and they're going to shoot it towards achieving that goal, and it becomes something else. It's about the way rather than what they started out to have, and certainly many people are different than I am, and so are really finding much value in the different teachings and stuff. But I really love the idea of letting us remove ourselves from that way of learning, because we're taught our whole lives. We're taught our whole lives that we don't know enough. We don't know enough to whatever it is, fill in the blank. And so by the time we're mature, we're listening to people telling us how to pray and how to parent and how to, run our lives. And what a spirituality of the heart gives back is our sovereign right to know. It says, you can remember what you don't know. That's precious to me.
Yeah. And I think that's congruent with what a lot of spiritual teachers have said. Like you say, a world that has taught us that everything we need to know can be known with our minds and or learned from teachers, experts, and gurus. We've often felt discouraged from listening to our hearts or trusting our inner knowing. But I think that any teacher or guru worth his or her salt is saying, hey, I'm giving you some pointers here, but you've got to discover this within yourself to really experience it. And I don't want you to just hang on my words. I want you to explore within and see whether this is true in your own experience.
Of course. I'm not saying the teachers are doing anything wrong, but it's like the approach,
Yeah.
So I'm going to become awakened. I'm going to become enlightened. And there's this sort of, like I say, if you are trying to achieve something, you almost always, at the spirit level, you fail. It's not like, to me, people talk about awakening, and I think my most awake place is when I first open my eyes in the morning, and I often have a really wonderful insight just waiting for me there. It's like it's wakeful, but not in our usual terms of wakeful.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's something that's actually discussed in spiritual literature, that there's a sort of a gap between major states of consciousness, and you can have intuitive or deep, insightful experiences as you go through that transitional gap period. And they talk about expanding the gap till one's whole life is lived in that gap, even though you're going through the cycle of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. You can continually consciously reside in what they call Turiya, or fourth state, that lies beneath or is fundamental to all the changing states.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know that much about these things, and but I do. I follow my instinct in a way, and I had my husband build me this cabin out behind our yard, and that I get up in the morning and I spend my first hours there, and I don't do well in busyness, and trying to take things in mentally now it's just a distraction.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I think you're doing great, and I don't think you could have done this whole course of love, channeled it, if you had been all caught up in your mind. You wouldn't have been a fit receptacle for it.
Yes. There was one story I can tell you about. When I first started, there weren't chapters, and I had gone through what became the first 19 chapters. And by this time, I was doing it every day, anytime I could be alone, I would go and I would work on it. And then on Sundays, I would share it. So it was being shared all along. And, but anyway, so one day I go to my computer and I don't hear anything. And I don't hear anything. And eventually what I heard was, you can't go on with your thinking mind. Those were the first words Jesus spoke to me personally, was you can't go on with your thinking mind. Because when A Course of Love began, it just began. And it was those words that began A Course that were the first words I heard. But this, you can't go on with your thinking mind. And I was paused for several months that were absolutely horrible for me. I felt very tortured in that time. I couldn't figure out what I was doing, how do I still have any mind left, And, but anyway, then what follows that is the most beautiful chapter of the Course called the Embrace. Almost everyone finds that that's the most beautiful chapter. When he came back to me, he said, now you are entering the embrace of love. And it's a very poetic chapter. And it's the first time he speaks of the loss of the ego. He says, there's no longer any I of the ego. And so there's this progression from that point on, more and more because it kind of begins talking to the ego, but by halfway through, he says right out, the ego's gone, and you have to accept this, because if you don't accept that the ego is gone, you're going to have these two selves. You don't want that. You don't want to stay divided.
So if he says the ego is gone, but what if the ego isn't gone? I mean, what if a person's ego is very much intact? And we probably ought to define ego in the course of answering that question, because there are a lot of definitions.
Well, my favorite is it's who you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the inner teacher who's always telling you what's right and wrong and judging and all of that, making you feel guilty, or all the fictions that you tell yourself, the things that aren't true, those kind of things are the way I describe it. And, there's I've had people ask me that question, like, how can it be said that you have left the ego behind just by reading a book? And I say, well, if you've just read the book, you probably haven't. So what Jesus is saying is there's something that happens, that if you've let this enter your heart, if you've let it come into you, and it's probably the biggest thing that I felt is the difference with receiving the words of Jesus was it was impossible to stand apart. It was impossible to stand apart from them. And as people read and feel that, I do believe that they lose that ego self. Mm-hmm. And the Course's definition is more like the self who believe it's separate and alone. So you really couldn't have taken in A Course of Love and still believe that you're separate and alone. Mm. If
you've really taken it in.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's more questions I could ask you here now, but I think let's take a step back, because I've heard your history many times, having listened to a number of your interviews and so on, but people listening to this, unless they're already a follower of yours or a reader of yours, don't know much about you in that sense. So it's kind of interesting to trace back how you got started on this whole thing. You were a administrator at the university, and then you had these two friends, and one of the friends they both got pregnant. And why don't you take up that story just to sort of bring us up to speed on how you ended up doing this?
Sure. It's well, as you said, I was working at the University of Minnesota, and these two women that I worked with became pregnant within days of each other, so they were due at the same time. But then one of them had a healthy boy, and one of them had a baby girl named Grace, who died when she was 5 weeks old. And it was that experience. We were already close, but in more of a normal friend way. But when Mary lost her baby, we were just existing in this, we were three women working together. We had this room, where we were together, and there was just this tenderness, a sort of palpable tenderness that we were exuding, just, to be together in that time of loss for Mary, and just trying to be, or not even trying to be, you just become gentle in a situation like that. And so I believe that began it. But then as Mary began to have these questions, about her baby's death and where do we go and what is, why would this happen to a baby, we all began to explore spirituality and in our different ways. Like I was reading Joseph Campbell, and I can't really remember, but we would all, then we would, we'd go to work in the morning and we'd bring these things that we were reading or feeling or the dreams that we were having back to the table. And we would spend our first little bit of time in the morning talking, and began to find out that we were having very amazingly similar insights and even at times experiences. And so that reading led me to pick up a book. I can remember it so clearly. I was at the University of Minnesota's bookstore, and I bought several books, and I got attracted to a cover of a book that was called Ask Your Angel. And I normally wouldn't go in for anything like that, but anyway, I bought that book, and I kind of regretted it. But I started to read it, and it said that you could talk to your angel, and that was my first experience of hearing beyond my senses, an angel piece. And I was in the basement of my 100-year-old home, and I wrote this little note to the angel piece. I keep a journal. I always have kept journals, so I was writing in my journal and said, will you speak to me? And I heard the words, smell the sweetness. And a smell like lilies wafted over me, which could come from nowhere in my old basement, which smelled very musty. And
it's worth noting that you weren't too far from the cat box.
Yes, I wasn't going to
the
say
litter
that.
box.
So you heard that in the other
I
one.
heard that.
I won't say that again. Yeah, I was close to the litter box. So that was the beginning for me, and I was kind of bowled over, and it was really. I mean, I know people back then particularly thought this was just a great thing, but I was almost a little embarrassed by it. It's like I don't know if I had really given it thought, if I would have tried, if I would have thought it was going to come true. I don't know. It was like this very unexpected thing that happened to me. And then, there were many then instances from then on where the knowing that I came to with this angel was pretty miraculous, and it helped people, and it expanded my way of knowing. And so that story was published, and just after it had been published, I had the dream that called me to A Course of Love. And the dream was, you can no longer sell your mind for money, your mind belongs to God. And I struggled with that for many months, just sort of trying to dismiss it. And it wasn't easily dismissed. And then I approached my husband about it. I didn't tell him I wanted to work for God, because I had just published these books. And so I said, it'd be a good time for me to expand, to do more writing. And so he agreed that I could leave, and I gave my notice and left at the end of March. So this
I think you said you were getting to the point where you couldn't work anyway because your mind wouldn't work anymore, and in that job.
True.
It wouldn't do what it was supposed to do.
Honestly, it felt like a biblical affliction. I'd always been a really good worker and really prided myself on my work, and it was like I couldn't do it anymore. I kind of got forced. You're right. I got forced. Yeah. I was trying to make the story a little bit shorter for those.
That's okay. I think that's a significant point, actually. Yeah, I do, and I've had things like that too. But it's sort of like, if we're there's a saying. How is it? For the wise, only an indication is necessary. And we're not all that wise, some of us, and it's kind of like, all right, an indication doesn't do it, let's give you a little bit of a nudge. Okay, a nudge doesn't do it, how about a good swift kick in the pants,
I know, I tried going down in my hours, I tried bringing my work home. I mean, I tried so many different things because I had these great friends at work, and I, of course, was making money, and we're a working class family, and but it turned out I really had to leave.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know what my work for God was. I never once in a million years dreamed it would be a new Course in Miracles, which is how it was put to me when it came. I had no thought like that even ever entered my mind.
Yeah, you said you're talking to priests and like, what am I supposed to do for God, and that kind of thing.
Well, I didn't tell them. You know, I mean, to tell anybody that, except for your close spiritual friends, that God wants you to work for, it sounds so insane. And so I just went to my priest and kind of said, I
What can I
was
do?
ready for something, and I ended up teaching CCD religion for a year. But I also was introduced from that visit to centering prayer, which I practice. And I know you had Thomas Keating on, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So, when you look back, that's such a fun thing. So for me, it's been almost 20 years. It was 1998 when A Course began to come. So 18 years. And when I look back, you can really begin to see everything.
Yeah.
How it all fit together and how it made what happened happen,
Yeah.
That you couldn't see at the time. It feels like you're doing the stupidest thing in the world in a certain sense. And then,
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of, you gain trust in divine guidance because if, in retrospect, you can see how it works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, so you quit your job and you went through a kind of a doldrums period where you weren't quite sure what you were going to do for God and all that, and the money was running out and this and that. And so how did the Course of Love finally kick in? And what was the final impetus to get that going?
It's so funny because I've been trying to find some of my old journals from that time because, to kind of put myself back there. And I did find, the computers and everything have changed so much, but I found this one, typed journal entry, like 50 pages from the month before A Course of Love came. And I was so at the end of my rope. My husband had lost his job and I was feeling like I was going to have to go get a job. And I didn't want to do that because I felt like that would be, giving up on this idea. And so I did a couple things. I returned to A Course in Miracles, which was one of them. I put it away for a while. And I opened it up and my eyes opened. It was in the back, the manual for teachers, which was always kind of my favorite part. And my eyes fell on the words, "Help us here." So that was very comforting to me. And then I had also spent some of my time during my days off going to church. Again, it was sort of my idea of having I like to get up early, and I would go to the 6:45 Mass, which was very short, and me and some old ladies. And so I wrote about that in this journal that the 2 days before I heard about A Course of Love's coming, there was this gospel about the woman with 2 copper coins, and the message was, she had to have total trust in God. It wasn't just giving what she could afford, it was having this total trust. And then the next day, this one I hadn't remembered, on the actual day that I heard about it was the sermon was about endurance and how you need to wait patiently. I mean, it was just like they were speaking to me, And so on that day, it was the 25th of November, and I got that thing about endurance after getting trust the day before. So I'm thinking, okay, I can hang on a while longer. And it was my friend Mary Love's birthday, and Mary Love was the mom of the baby Grace who had died, and she is still my soul sister friend.
Yeah, I met her a little while ago.
Yes,
yeah.
You did. She's helped me with technology. Thank God she's good at that. So she came over for her birthday, and we were talking just about, it was November 25th. We were talking about normal things, or ordinary, Thanksgiving, Christmas, stuff like that. And then we began to talk with more depth and eventually about our dreams. And she told me she had just had a dream in which she saw a new Course in Miracles. And that was when I began to take in the idea that this was what had been trying to get through to me, was because of her sharing that dream. And then on November, so that was November 25th, on December 1st, I was ready. Yeah. And I sat down, and the rest is history, as they say.
Did you sit down knowing that you were about to scribe A Course of Love, or did you just you were just sitting there and all of a sudden you heard a voice?
Well, after Mary left that day, actually, in my journaling, and I'd had this happen with the angel piece where I would have a voice come in when I was journaling, and I heard, this was an announcement made to you this day that, and it was very short. It was like 3 sentences. This was the announcement made to you this day, A Course in Miracles, a new course, something like that, a new Course in Miracles. And so then I knew it was coming, but I was very doubtful in a certain way, because I thought to myself, who would want a new Course in Miracles? It was like, it was, I mean, it had meant so much to me, and I knew how incredibly devoted to it people all over the world were. And I knew Helen took 7 years. I'd read her story in A Journey Without Distance, and so I thought, what am I letting myself in for, and who's going to want it when I'm done? So I kind of went through those things with which my humanity was considering, me and my humanity was thinking about. But I knew, even as I'm thinking about it, I knew I was going to do it if that's what it was. And so on this day, on December 1st, which was interestingly, in terms of the church, it was the beginning of Advent, the time of the coming of Christ. And so, we get the symbols that match us, so I was getting these symbols that matched me. And I waited a very short time, and there were those big old computers then, and the cursor seemed to blink so much more than now, and it wasn't long at all. And I heard the words, "This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course." And I knew it was Jesus, and I fell to my knees, and it was very powerful. And the best way I've known to describe it is I couldn't stand apart from it. It was in me. And that is a powerful thing. And when it's direct, it's more powerful than like when something comes in you by reading. It was a powerful thing. And then... I got back in my chair, and it began. And it was like hearing thoughts I wasn't thinking. Like it wasn't an audible voice. It wasn't a male voice. It was just like these thoughts were coming, and I would type them. And I would, it's called receiving in A Course of Love. Jesus calls me the first receiver. And receiving isn't passive. I've had a lot of people think that that's a passive thing. It's not passive. It's a very intense, attentive sort of listening. And, if I can kind of show, it's almost like, like I would quiver, between things, with this coming on, like it was almost there. And, it doesn't sound like much of an experience, but it was a great experience. And I would at times find myself, rocking. I would suddenly, I would have been typing for a while, and all of a sudden I realize I'm like this, and I'm rocking, and my heart is beating really strong, and I can feel it in my ear. There aren't a whole lot of exciting things to say about, typing, of course, but these are some of the ones that alerted me, and also that that complete cessation of time. I would forget to eat, and I actually became sick because I forgot to eat. And so there were these different manifestations of the state of being so absorbed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a very genuine experience, and you're obviously a very sincere person, and it's not without precedent. I mean, a good portion of the world's revered books and scriptures were cognized in one way or another, and almost we could say channeled. And not only spiritual things. I mean, people like Mozart, he would just cognize a whole symphony in a flash, and then he would have to take many, many hours writing it down, but he had the whole thing in one nutshell,
Yes.
that it just would come to him as an inspiration. And I very much, it doesn't matter what I believe, but for what it's worth, I very much believe that there are these sort of different strata of creation, and various intelligences residing on various levels, and we may not be aware of them, but they may be aware of us, and that they may actually be playing some kind of role in helping us not blow ourselves to bits, and and certain people are receptive enough to be go-betweens,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I think it's, for me, when people call me a channeler or a scribe, I mean, I consider what I have done closer to mysticism. To that sort of state of being, and also because I always wanted to be a writer. I didn't have ambitions that were other than writing, and I think
you're a good writer. I mean, I've read a lot of your stuff now. It's very well written. So obviously, if you couldn't write to save your life, you wouldn't have been really a suitable person to do this.
Maybe not, but it's. I think like the works of the mystics. It's like they got absorbed in this experience, and then they try to share it.
Yeah.
And that trying to share it is usually is very often done in writing.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of a lot of the world's great epic spiritual tradition texts, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, were both just sort of cognized, one by Vedavyasa, one by Valmiki, and they just wrote the whole thing down. But they supposedly represent real events that these guys were able to sort of tune into and cognize. So anyway, there are probably hundreds of examples of this thing happening throughout the ages, and so there's no reason why it should be any less valid or significant in our own contemporary time.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so we've talked for an hour about, some philosophical points and about your history and everything leading up to A Course of Love. And we've alluded a little bit to what the emphasis of the Course of Love is as opposed to the Course in Miracles. But it's 700 pages long, and I'm sure we haven't done justice to it. So do you think it would be a good idea for us to spend a good portion of the remainder of our time laying out what the Course of Love has to offer, what it's all about?
How about if I tell you what I love about it?
Yeah, great.
Yeah. There's certain things about it that I love more than others, as is true for all of us, But the wholeheartedness was a big one, and I have a feeling with that of, more down to earth than a lot of things. And of course, back in 2001 when this first came out, nobody was talking about love. It was all more Eastern, and it was mindful, and it was, this was very unusual. Now, I like people like Brene Brown, who talks about wholeheartedness and authenticity. So it's got these certain things that have a flavor of bringing it back to the person, and that's one, I believe. Wholeheartedness is that combining of everything. And one of my favorite quotes from A Course is, "Be true to love, and you can't fail to be true to yourself." And you could say it the other way around: be true to yourself, and you can't fail to be true to love. One thing that I didn't mention yet is that when A Course of Love was done, Jesus called me to be a companion. He said, I asked him, and I always sort of wished he would give me practical answers, but, especially when I was done with the book, I thought maybe he'd say what to do with it. But he said, be a companion to those willing to leave hell behind. And I had trouble with that for a long time until I began to see hell as not being who you are. I think that's the hellish part of life. So, be a companion to those willing to be who they are, who they truly are,
Yeah. So who are we truly? Is it something that can be described?
Well, I'm really fascinated by our humanity. It's like this doesn't show up as the same thing in everyone. It's, the divine as showing up as Mari, and the divine showing up as Rick. So it's as we go on in the books. In the treatises, there's a treatise on the personal self where we begin to hear a little bit more about who we are in our humanity. And, Jesus says, I love your hair, your eyes, the shape of your skull. It's this bringing back of the love and of our tender hearts. There's a whole chapter on tenderness, on the time of tenderness. And so there's a great range of acceptance of feelings, and most of them are of the gentle and loving feelings. But as we progress and move into the dialogue, so there's just like a demarcation line between, I see it, and partially because it was one of the other times I was given a directive while I was receiving. So there is A Course of Love, and then there's the treatises, which have 4 treatises: a treatise on the art of thought, a treatise on the nature of unity and its recognition, a treatise on the personal self, and then a treatise on the new. And so when we get to it, when we were coming in between a treatise on the personal self and a treatise on the new, Jesus said I had to quit everything that I was doing in terms of, I was, working on editing then of what I'd already received. I was meeting with the Course of Love group already. It started right away. And I had to leave that behind to be totally in the new. And so there's this, what Jesus calls the new is very undefinable, and it's just, but it's sort of moving us from the concentration before, which is really about getting rid of the old, which is like, it's like scraping paint to get rid of all the things that we've been conditioned to our whole lives. And then as you move to the new, it's more like putting on the new paint and just, you're getting fresher. So that is, and I just fell in love. That was my favorite part of the book. Most of the time it is. But it talks about the beginning of creating a new world and how that future is yet to be predicted, that there's no real plan for this as we're going into a new time. It talked about the people being born into Christ consciousness, a new sort of consciousness that they wanted to learn directly. So this was all about this movement to being in very direct contact and knowing the divine in us as us. So now instead of telling you the parts I really loved about those, I've just kind of given it a quick one. And then but the dialogues, I loved all of the dialogues. I know in that journal, in some of my journal entries, I found things saying, well, I didn't really get it until the dialogues. I was working too hard. It was like there was this, but once it got to the dialogues, it was like everything opened up. And it's what happens with dialogue, the sense of being in communication. And, like you and I are in communication. There's more of that sense with everything that comes in the dialogues. And also there becomes a greater acceptance of all of our humanity, even feeling things that we don't think we ought to feel. We've been so burdened by this thought that, we are these thoughts and teachings. For instance, here's one I can give you. I still get nervous public speaking. That's not my forte. And so the old idea of ego is that if you're nervous, you still have an ego. Okay, so I've been told these things, over many years, and people very tender-hearted people have been told that's your ego because they're anxious. Any feeling almost that wasn't bland and banal was the ego in those communities. And so what I am very excited about when we're in the dialogues is this acceptance of even feelings like anger. It's like we don't have to have an ego or a false self or not know that we're in union. That feeling anger doesn't mean that we have fallen out of anything. It means that, usually for me, it means I have not been true to myself. That's usually when I get angry. I haven't been true to myself. And so But anyway, what I love about it is because I knew so many people who'd experienced so much pain with the old way of talking about it.
Yeah. I think what you're alluding to here, and I think you address it in some of your writings, is there's a tendency, and I don't know about it, maybe A Course in Miracles, also in the sort of Neo-Advaita area, to dismiss all this human stuff, like feelings, as illusory and as not worthy of our attention or consideration, and it can end up in a rather cold-heartedness. Oh, your baby died. It's just an illusion. The baby didn't exist anyway, or the baby's in a better place, or whatever, without really engaging in the human feelings that would naturally accompany such an event. And and there's a lot of teachings which emphasize over and over and over again that there really is you're not a person. There is no person. The sense that there is a person is part of the ignorance. And as a friend of mine is fond of saying, Francis Bennett, I don't know if you've watched any of his interviews, of course you're a person. You're not just only a person. There's more to you than that. It's like saying to a wave, of course you're a wave. There you are. You're just not only a wave. You're also this ocean. Yeah. There's a deeper, broader dimension, but it doesn't. That broader dimension doesn't negate the individual dimension. In fact, there's a whole thing we could go into about the personal and impersonal aspects of God. Even God has a personal aspect as well as an impersonal aspect.
Yes. Yeah. So, and so those, I just felt those were the things that were most in need of being said. The acceptance of feelings, the acceptance of our personhood, and there's a wonderful, wonderful sections on creativity. He uses creativity to talk about some things, but it's like inviting back, I think creativity and godliness, creativity and divinity, creativity and soulfulness, they all go together so much. And so it's great credence given to our ability to be creative and to be creators. And there's a wonderful, wonderful section on, very short, but about the way of Mary. Mm-hmm. And so the feminine, I really think the whole of A Course of Love is leading into the feminine energies. And the idea of Mary comes in here with Mary having birthed Jesus, and that because we're doing this birthing now, we're doing this birthing of the new, we're birthing ourselves anew, we're birthing a new time, and I'm excited to be part of this time, and but so this idea of Mary gives us an incarnational side of things, and that other example of what we're here to do. We're here to birth the divine into the world. So and that also the way of Mary. I'm sorry, I'm probably being terribly an ungood interviewee now. I'm jumping around too much, but
that's right.
The way of Mary also addresses those who aren't called to do, and I don't think it's only
it addresses what?
Those who aren't called to do. Uh-huh. How people can feel like if they don't have a calling, if they don't have some particular thing to do, and they feel really bad about that, they're kind of always waiting for it, and a way of Mary accepts those who are not called to do. And there's like the old anchoresses, and the women were anchoresses back in Christianity and mystical. It was sort of a mystical state, but we're told that those are the way of Mary anchor this new reality, and I believe that what is happening as we begin to get this influx, it's almost like, to me, a collaboration. We're collaborating with the divine to create the new now, and it's different. It's not, my sister doesn't understand this. You're like you are. Jesus calls us forerunners of the new. We are forerunners of the new, and it can be a difficult position to be in. But as we actually see that we're creating new states of being, so as I received A Course of Love, I created a new state of being in myself, And we do that. We create these new states of being, and then we anchor them in the world. So what somebody said was reality is no longer our reality. We have that reality.
Yeah.
Uh,
I often feel in my own life that it's like, I don't know, this metaphor just came to mind, but like when you paint, if you're painting a wall, you have to dip the roller or the brush in the paint, and then you apply it to the wall, and after a while it runs out of paint, and so you dip it again and you apply it again. I kind of feel like that's how my days go. You know, I happen to have a meditation practice, but there's other ways people can do this, but I always feel like I'm just getting infused with sort of the divine energy, if you want to call it that, and then spend my day applying it in some way, you know, and then get another infusion and then apply it. And I don't know, do you like that metaphor? Does that sort of fit in what you experience?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I do.
Like you spend your time in the cabin in the morning, you know,
yeah.
And then I'm sure you derive deep sustenance from that, and then you're able to transmit that or convert that into something that others can benefit from.
Yes, but it's also, I mean, this is kind of a newer idea to me, but it is also creating. You know, it's like just being there in meditation, just being there sitting, is creating this new state of being. Mm-hmm. And it suddenly felt different to me in the last year or so, that we're getting these pockets of this new state of being all over the place. And that's really kind of what's happening in the world. And we do anchor something. We anchor something by allowing them. Yeah. And by, you know, being, you know, however we nurture that in ourselves and others. So
do you feel like that the world is headed for a much brighter time because there's some new state of being or some age of enlightenment or something dawning? And is there anything in the Course in Miracles about that predicts it or describes it?
There's a wonderful line. Again, I can't remember.
I said Course of Miracles, I meant Course of Love, but either one.
There actually is one in A Course in Miracles about how, wish I could remember. But anyway, it's a beautiful quote about how heaven and earth will be as one, basically. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think people can take that to be the earth will pass away for this combining to happen. But with that combined with A Course of Love, I take it that heaven and earth can come together. I do think that these structures that the ego has created, you know, to protect and conceal and deceive and all of that, they're going to have to come down probably before we get better. And
when you say structures, you don't just mean in the individual, you mean in the society, economic structures and political structures and stuff like that.
Yes, so we might, you know, there's certainly nothing that says we won't have a harder time before it gets better.
The darkest hour is always before the dawn. So I was going to actually ask you if you had any commentary on the current political scene, but you've just sort of made one. Do you kind of feel like things are always well and wisely put in that, and the way things are going could very well result in the kind of, you know, crash and burn or phoenix-like destruction and reemergence of a better world or something?
I think that deception has to come to light, you know, and the way that we've been deceived and are deceiving ourselves and letting ourselves be deceived by the structures that are, I mean, I think that has to come to light. And I think it is. This is a perfect opportunity for that to come to light, for what is not kind, you know, not humane. And one of the things that I have seen, because, I mean, we really are just beginning, my husband and I, beginning to recover from our financial decline that started when I left my job, you know, and we were on the Obamacare plan. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that went up like, it doubled this last year. And anyway, but when we first went on that, it was like, no one seemed to understand what it felt like not to be able to afford health care. And no one understood how difficult it was made by the program and this sort of thing. And it's like, and I don't mean this in in any way, like, I'm glad this is happening to people. It's just that I believe so many people are beginning to see the effects of this unkindness. This is the way I call it, the unkindness, to leave people without being able to be insured, or to cut, or to have the cost so high they can't be insured, or to, there's so many things that have gone on in the last, really since the recession, even despite, our Obama years, that have made the world harder and harder for people.
Yeah.
And more people are feeling it. And so the only good I can see in that is that we all have a sense of what the poor have been going through for a long time, and a greater sense and a more personal, because if you've never been there, it's really hard to have that compassion, like for those who need to be seen and heard, and
and even some of the poorest people in our country are kind of wealthy by comparison with a couple billion people in the world. So they really, and we've all heard these statistics, how the top 100 wealthiest people in the world possess more wealth than the bottom 80% or some such thing. So there's this great inequity, and and tremendous suffering, while others have so much more than they could possibly need. I'm reminded of a quote from Martin Luther King at this point, which is, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And hopefully it's like when you start getting into political topics like this, it gets very controversial and people become very polarized. But I think what you're saying here is really apt, which is important, which is that, and it kind of connects with your whole theme about the heart, an awakening of the heart, is that we really need to feel the suffering of others. I mean, that's a basic tenet of just about every religion. And if we're really feeling that, how could we possibly allow so much suffering to continue in the world? There's something wrong with this picture, that needs to be remedied.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, we're going to continue talking about what's in A Course of Love, but Marie from Boulder sent in a question, and I do want to ask people's questions as they come in. And this is kind of related to something I was asking in the beginning. She said, is the Jesus that you channeled a being separate from yourself, or simply an aspect of your own deep mind? How do you know?
Well, I would guess it's a good way to put it, but it would be like having a conversation with each other, and there are two voices, and even if that voice comes into me, there is an awareness of the two voices. So yes, I believe Jesus is a being, and that the Christ, in A Course of Love language, the part of Jesus that is universal because of being, that oneness with the Creator, is, like I say, that's called Christ consciousness. It's not that we're walking around with Jesus in us, but we're walking around with Christ consciousness in us. And I just as often call it, a spark of God, or our divinity. But yes, I did feel Jesus as and not even, of course, when I'm receiving A Course of Love, this is stuff I didn't know.
Right. There's
a lot of stuff I didn't know. I always use the example of the word treatises because I went and looked it up. I thought I knew what it meant, but I wasn't sure. What's a treatise, So it was not me as I know myself, for sure. But I've had conversations with Jesus. I had a lot of conversations with Jesus for the first 5 years after A Course of Love was published. And then he told me it was time to start relying on myself, and I didn't have as many with him. But he'll pop in now and then, when I'm journaling. Very distinct voice. And I know other people who hear from Jesus, and their Jesus is not my Jesus, because we're always different in relationship. This is the thing. It's like you talking to me are different than you talking to your wife.
Right.
You know, so we're all different in relationship, and that's to be prized, you know, not to be used as a, you know, well, it can't be then because it's different here and different there. No, but union in relationship is a huge teaching of the Course of Love.
Yeah. One comment I just want to make is that, you know, you strike me as being very, this is my personal editorial opinion here, you strike me as being very sincere and sweet and genuine. I've spoken with some people who are into channeling, both on and off Batgap, who, I don't know, it's like I have a feeling there's a lot of them there, a lot of ego there, which is undoubtedly filtering or altering or coloring whatever it is they're channeling. In fact, I sometimes suspect that they're not channeling anybody, they're just kind of tapping into some level of creativity and within themselves and coming out with a whole bunch of stuff. So I think, you know, you're an example of someone whose kind of sweetness and innocence make her a reliable source for this kind of wisdom. It's like I don't get the feeling like you're really in the way, you know, of what's coming through.
Yes, I really had hoped Jesus was going to inspire me to write something on my own. You know what I mean? It's like that's what I kind of thought, what I hoped it would be. I mean, I would do anything, but it was like I was hoping, and I was writing during this time, but it was awful. You know, I was trying too hard, and I was writing this awful stuff. But that was really what I hoped. I had no aspirations to being, you know, a channel or a scribe or anything like that. But I do like being called the first receiver, partially because it also includes everyone else in being receivers. And also, you know, I have met people, you know, I really didn't like having my work lumped with people who would help you find your cat, you know, or, you know, there's a reverential part to this. So.
Yeah. So in other words, somebody who might help you find your cat or help the police solve a crime or something has its value. But they're like psychics. They're sort of not necessarily picking up on anything profound. They're just sort of picking up on some information which you could get through your ordinary senses if you were in the right place.
Yeah, it's like all those things are fine, but they're not the same. You know, they're not the same as this. And to just lump it all, you know, it's sort of like anything that's sort of extra sensory gets sometimes put in this one category.
Yeah.
And,
well, that's like saying, lumping all forms of music together, you know, and saying that the Sex Pistols are the same as Beethoven or something. Does it sometimes amaze you when you like look at this 700 pages and think, holy cow, you know, how in the world did all this come out of through me?
Yes, it does amaze me, and it was. I mean, I think it changed me so much. I mean, I was called to an orientation of solitude afterwards. I felt briefly sort of elated, and then it's actually about living in the world again. You know, after you've done something like this, you know, being able to, I understand why people leave. And I always kind of had this fantasy, you know, of a monk's life or something, but I am married and I love my family, and that love has informed my spirituality tremendously too. So I, you know, got the next best thing with this cabin in the woods, but it was very, very, it's hard for me, like my sensibilities changed. Like I can't go shopping for an afternoon. I shop as quickly as I can. I can't take noise for very long. You know, it's, so the effects on me are, and I mean, I'm still normal, you know, I mean, I talk to myself as ordinary, you know, I'll go, you know, have a drink now and then or something, you know, but I just can't take too much. It's like and that's really sort of the feeling was like, it was so much, and it's still so much that I just need all this quiet time to hold it.
Sure. Yeah, you became more refined through the process, and therefore your tastes became more refined, and your interests became more refined, and you know.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, that's the way I see
I like
it.
refined. That's lovely. Thank you.
Sure, it's like, I don't know, metaphors keep coming to mind, but like if we have a hammer and chisel or something, we can break rock with it. But if the chisel is refined to the point where it becomes a scalpel, then it's no longer really suited for breaking rocks. You know, it needs to do more delicate tasks.
Yes. That's nice. Thank you. Yeah. I like that.
So what more do you want to tell us about A Course in Love? If you've, you know, have an opportunity here to let people know a little bit more.
Well, I would just I started on the end of learning and then kind of dropped it, but I think I remember one time, you know, somebody say, well, do you mean you never read anymore? You know, what do you mean the end of learning? And it's sort of like it's the beginning of coming to know. The end of learning is the beginning of coming to know. And it's not about anything specific. And that's the really hard thing. You know, it's sort of like, okay, it's about the knowing itself. And that it's a hard thing to talk about, but it's about the knowing itself, to begin to trust in your own knowing. This is a really huge thing. And then I absolutely love that Jesus ends on dialogue. So that we go from teachers and learners to sharing in unity and to being in dialogue with each other. And this is, in fact, I watched some of your talks, and I watched the one where you were talking at Berkeley recently, or wherever you were talking.
Out in Berkeley.
And I loved you because you weren't trying to teach me anything. You were sharing who you are, your curiosity, your ideas, you know. And so this is sort of...
Hey, you should have seen me 30 years ago.
What were you doing then?
Oh, I was teaching, and I was talking about stuff that I hadn't experienced, you know, and you know, being rather proselytizing, and you know, it was probably a pain in the ass for many people.
Yeah, okay, there you get it then. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is I love this move. I love this move that's being made, and people, of course, will still try, you know, to do teaching and to do things the old way, but I think the more we move to dialogue, you know, it's kind of a time-honored thing to be in communication, but also with this understanding that this is happening to more people in the world, that we're becoming these conduits, the more we share. I just had this wonderful thing happen to me the other day. I was sharing with a guy from, there's a group in Santa Fe, there's about 60 groups around the country now. And with the ones I've visited, I don't see teaching and learning going on. You know, there'll be somebody who kind of facilitates, but then people, you know, are very lovely about sharing. But I was telling him that what I've been hearing lately is only do what you want to do. It's like keep getting this guy, only do what you want to do. And it's kind of contrary, you know, to to way the most of us live, you know, only do what you want to do. And so I was still sort of marveling over this, and I have actually been, you know, contemplating that, because then of course it calls you, what do you want to do? But he said to me, well, that sounds like A Course in Miracles. There's this chapter in the manual for teachers that talks about trust, and I think that's in there. And so I went to it, and so and I'd forgotten this, that it kind of lays out this, like you were talking about some of the Eastern traditions, they lay things out. And when you get to this certain point, it says, and now the teacher of God does what he wants to do. It's as simple as that. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, so these things are always kind of combining, but that sharing, you know, when I share with people, they almost always share with me something that will lead me to something else, you know, or something that I need to hear in that moment. So I really am excited about dialogue, and always excited about things that remind me how much I loved A Course in Miracles, and that they are kind of one piece. I think when people, in fact, it's really wonderful now. There are some groups that are combining they'll take passages of A Course in Miracles and passages of A Course of Love and have that as their focus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible how much differently people begin to hear A Course in Miracles when it's combined with A Course of Love. So,
is there a certain faction of Course in Miracles people who see you as some kind of a renegade?
yes, yes, there is.
Yeah.
And usually it's kind of fun that I usually get warning, like somebody will say, well, don't read this review on Amazon, or some of these people who like to criticize will email a lot of people, and so somebody will say, don't read this from so-and-so because
It'll hurt your feelings or something.
Yeah, I don't know that it would hurt my feelings, but I'd rather not read them.
Yeah.
So people are kind that way to do that. But I'm really, really excited that A Course in Miracles community is beginning to accept A Course of Love, because this is clearly an audience that Jesus intended. He said, I prepared them with A Course in Miracles. And now, so I don't know how much, public speaking and that kind of thing I do, but I will be going to the Course in Miracles conference in this time next year. And I will do everything I can to be sure that we can bring, I can't do everything, of course. I can't change people's minds, but I will do what I can on that end. And I am very, I'll wait until you ask me.
Well, I was wondering, in the beginning we were talking about how Adyashanti talks about head, heart, and gut realizations, and there are other parallels to that in other spiritual teachings. And I was wondering whether you think there might be just as A Course in Love is sort of a sequel to A Course in Miracles, I was wondering whether you think there might be another whole thing that might come out either through you or somebody else that would take it a major step further.
I certainly wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I think we're always growing. We're always evolving into further realizations.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this end of learning thing. And, I feel that I'm always growing and evolving into further realizations, as you just phrased it. And so in that sense, I feel like there's no end to learning. But I guess when you say end to learning, you're sort of meaning end in the sense of taking stuff from authorities that we're not necessarily experiencing ourselves, and that we really need to put an end to that kind of dynamic and just sort of really know things in our hearts directly and cognitively, or sort of viscerally, directly, experientially. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, that was very good phrasing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
There's somebody who sent in a question, Michael Cantos. He said, and this could perhaps be thought of in a more broad way. He said, any advice for those of us looking forward to meeting with you in Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia on February 25th? Thank you, Michael, Center for Contemporary Mysticism. And we can broaden that out to say, people all over the world who are listening to this, who may or may not end up meeting with you. Any advice for them?
I have begun to, I really didn't before because of the groups, that were eager to form, but I've begun to say to people, why don't you just read it once? Just read it straight through without, applying, without, going to a group, without applying any thought or effort or anything. Just let it enter you. Just let it wash over you. And so, of course, you can do that anytime. It doesn't mean that you have to do that the first time, but if you've already read it, you might read it the second time. If you've read it in a group, you might read it the second time, just reading it through and letting it begin to have this flow that pulls you in. But that was one thing I was about to say when I said, I'll let you ask me. I am very thrilled about, this is my last presentation this year is going to be in Philadelphia at the Center for Contemporary Mysticism. So one day I'll be speaking with Course of Love people, and I also am going to do I get to do an hour on, the more broader topic of mysticism, and it's the first time that I've been had the opportunity to do that. So I'm looking forward to both of those very much.
What kind of things are you going to say about mysticism?
Well, I'm going to talk about all the things that drew me to mystery. I always try to speak of things in a way that lets everybody else know that probably they have already felt these mystical tendencies in themselves. Because it feels to me like, it seems too hard. And I know, as a young person entering spirituality, I couldn't afford to go to teachings and, all of that. And probably why, like I already said, my books are my friends. But I think we're all natural mystics or born mystics. And we probably have memories of mystical experiences. And if we can bring those forward in ourselves, we can begin to have that sense of we're not different. There isn't a separate category of people necessarily called mystics. So.
It's funny because when you were younger, you used to love to read mystery novels, and you wanted to be a writer of mystery novels, and you ended up doing this, and in a way, you're writing about mystery, and
I am,
but
yes.
it just has this whole spiritual orientation now.
Very different. And you know why? The main reason I wanted to write mysteries was because I knew even then I never wanted to promote myself. It's like I wanted to be this famous writer, but I didn't want to, have to be selling myself all the time. And so I thought there were all these series mysteries at the time. So I thought if I started a series mystery, there'd just be people there waiting for my next book.
Yeah.
And I'd just have to write. I wouldn't have to do anything else.
Yeah. So you said that this presentation you're going to give in Philadelphia is your last one of the year, but it's only February. You're not going to give any more all year?
Yes, I was at the Course in Miracles conference in Vegas in April this year. And I've been traveling.
This year meaning last year?
Yeah, last year,
right.
So 16. And I decided I would give it a year by this trying a more public life. And so I visited with a lot of groups and that kind of thing. And so this will be my final one, and I'm going to take a pause. Whether it'll end up being a whole year, I don't know. But I am going to take a little pause. And because, the whole message of A Course of Love is you have to be who you are.
Yeah.
You have to be who you are. And so when I get too busy, I feel like I lose a part of myself. And so I'm going to give myself some time and just kind of feel into what the next things will be.
Yeah. What you might enjoy is, rather than sort of flying all over, giving a talk here and a talk there, you might enjoy doing a retreat every now and then where you're just in a really beautiful retreat kind of setting and people come there and you spend a whole weekend with them where everybody can really settle in.
Yes. I haven't even really, thought about these things, different ways that this could be done. And so I'll take some time and do that. And I know a lot of people who I'm sure will give me some good ideas.
Yeah. Another thing is that some friends of mine do these kind of webinars using Zoom, which is a certain kind of software, and they have 20, 30 participants who are scattered around the world, and they have a nice little thing for an hour or two with these people and in the comfort of their living room, just as you're sitting now. So that kind of thing would also be a way of connecting with people without having to race around.
Well, that's one of the things that I've done with this interview with you, which is arguably this is my greatest exposure. So I really appreciate that I could do that from the comfort of my home. But I bought about 3 mics and all these different things to get it, set up right, to get what worked for me. Because I do realize this is one way I could share that might be more comfortable.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully, and reach a larger audience too. You can talk to people all over the world, which is amazing.
Yeah, I know, it's neat, isn't it?
We have many translations. The French translation is done now of the whole book, first one of the whole book, and we have a very active group beginning the Spanish translation.
Oh, great.
Or it's done. The first round of it is done, so they're refining it now and getting ready to publish. It's being translated into Norwegian and Swedish. And I'm going to forget something, and let's see, Dutch and Japanese.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you, just to jump back into the fray here for a second.
Yeah.
Does Jesus or does A Course of Love discuss reincarnation at all? And the reason for that is I have a question about it that somebody sent in, but I wonder if that's even on in your lexicon.
It's really not.
Okay.
It would probably, I have never really been interested in it. It's not in A Course of Love, so I don't really have much to say. You could probably answer it better than I. But in terms of A Course of Love, no, it doesn't say anything specifically about reincarnation.
Uh-huh. Okay, the reason I asked, someone from France sent in a question about whether as souls we kind of evolve up through various species to higher and higher expressions, and eventually become enlightened beings, but we don't need to discuss that if it's not really your bailiwick.
Okay.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I hope you've been enjoying this. I have. Any final thoughts you want to express? They don't even have to be final if you come up with more ideas, but I don't want to just belabor this. But if you have something you really haven't had a chance to say that you want to leave people with, or you want to be sure to get in.
I don't know what I've said. That happens to me too. It's like, well, gee, I don't know what I've talked about, so I'm probably better to quit while I'm ahead.
Well, without resorting to memory, just intuitively, what do you feel moved to say by way of a wrap-up point?
Oh, just to encourage everyone to look at their lives with the eyes of their heart, and to know that you have a greater knowing probably than you allow yourself to get in touch with, and let yourself begin to get in touch with that, and then let it expand into the world.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad I asked you to do that. That was nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just make a couple of wrap-up points. I've been speaking with Mari Perron, and as always, I'll create a page on batgap.com that will link to her website and her book and anything else she wants me to put there. And you'll be able to get in touch with her and so on. This interview is part of an ongoing series, which has been going on for about 7 years now, and which I hope will continue for many years to come. If you would like to stay in touch, go to batgap.com, and you can sign up to be notified by email each time there's a new one. And also, you'll see there's a at a glance menu. If you click on that, you'll kind of see a quick summary of everything that you'll find on the site. Things such as signing up for the audio podcast and everything like that. So go to batgap.com. Next week, I'll be speaking with someone named Nicola Amadora, and the week after that, Dwayne Elgin. And on. It's really a joy getting to know these people each week and talking to them. I love it, and I hope all of you are enjoying it too. So thanks, Mari.
Well, thank you. And can I please my publisher by telling people that they can find the book?
Yes, please.
Yes. It's available, of course, on Amazon, but at bookstores too. If you can't find it there, ask them.
You have a copy you want to hold up there? And I'll be linking to the Amazon page where your book can be purchased also. I'll be linking to that from your Batgap page. Okay. There it is.
There that is?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And there is, now Rick benefited from this, and I didn't even think of it because it's so new, I'd kind of forgotten.
Well, that was a great little thing.
It's a resource.
Yeah. It's an overview written by somebody else, but it's a nice little synopsis.
It is. It's just... I think also for people who've read it and would like to introduce it to a friend, this would be very nice.
Good place to start.
The website, can I tell the
Yes,
website?
Yeah, anything, sure.
There's two websites, www.acourseoflove.org and also www.centerforacourseoflove.org. And there's different things on each of them. I would hope you might visit both. I do a blog. There's also on the center site, there's a concordance that can help you find, and a search facility, which is what I use more than the concordance. If I want to follow a theme, like the Well of Spirit. I can go in there and type in what Well of Spirit and find all the references to that. So I think that's something people really love to hear about. And then I am going to be in Philadelphia. You can find that out on the events page of Course of Love's website, and that will be February the 25th and 26th.
Good. And I'll link to these websites from your page on batgap.com in case somebody's listening to this while they're driving or something. They can't really stop and write that down. But I'll just go to batgap.com and you'll see Mari's page. And if you're listening to this 3 years from now, the page will be, buried under many other interviews. But you can always do a search in the search box. And we also have like an alphabetical index of all the guests. And you can easily find her page and go to her websites and link to her book and all that stuff. All right, well, thanks, Mari. I really appreciated it. And great getting to know you. And
same here. I heard great things about you too. It was like, oh, Rich and Irene Archer. They're,
Great. All right, well, thanks. And thanks to those who've been listening or watching. We'll see you next week.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To everyone.
Sure.